we have a fabulous guest with us today. We'll do all introductions and whatnot. But before this, Daniel, I saw that you have a ring on your finger. You are a married man, yes?
Hey.
Oh, yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Did you have a wedding?
We did, actually.
Exactly right. If you could rate between 1 and 10 the difficulties you've had with the wedding dress for your fantastic and fabulous wife, where would you rate it? Where would you put that number? Would it be possibly at many tens of thousands?
Hakeem is seething over there.
Okay, so this is maybe an unfair question, only because, first of all, I've been married an insane... It's like 18 years I've been married already.
Nice.
Thank you.
Your wife guy.
But we got married in my wife's home country, in her hometown. Not her hometown, but where she was living.
Yeah.
Which is in Russia. And we were engaged for a grand total of 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
I had a worker's visa. It was expiring at the end of that year. It was December. And I didn't have a job lined up. So we were like, well, let's get married. And then that way, at the very least, like if I have to leave, I have a cause to come back, even if I can't find a job. Because long story short, we've been doing long distance for a while at that point. We knew we wanted to get married. So it was just kind of a rush job. And my mother-in-law somehow pulled together a wedding in 3 weeks.
That's
right
amazing.
before New Year's Eve, which is, if you don't know, in Russia, the biggest holiday.
Yeah.
And so, like, I wasn't part of her whole dress thing. I don't know how difficult that was for her. All I know is that I proposed 2.5 weeks later. We were going to her city to do the ceremony, and we already had everything set up. So that's
legendary.
Yes.
You stepped over all the hurdles. Probably 99% of cis straight
it was
dudes
insane.
Despise.
I love it.
I'm
very happy for you.
Do you need to vent, buddy?
I don't think I'll be able to stop you. I'll just say this much, all right? Me and my fiance had a very specific idea of the dress that she wanted. So we found a particular service, seamstress business, whatever, that does the thing that we would like. But they are like 3,000, 4,000 almost kilometers away from where I live.
Wow.
Yeah.
Couldn't find someone local.
It's very specific, all right? It's a very specific.
That's
what we're
very
trying to do.
specific.
Yeah. Anyways, so we send them the details and the measurements and whatnot. They send it back, and it's perfect except for one little thing. Of course, it's a bit tight around the shoulders. That's it, right? And a little bit, a few other things. We're like, you know what? Let's just send it back to them so that they can fix it. But these people live in a country where their bread and butter is not paying taxes, so they refuse to give us a business.
You're getting a dress from Oklahoma, okay?
They refuse to give us a business address. Instead, they give us an address in a parallel in the neighboring country, and they're like, "There's a guy there. Send it to the guy there, and then we'll drive over and pick it up." It's like a village in the middle of nowhere. I'm trying to get the fucking package there, and it's one day it's there, one day it's in a different city altogether, and it just keeps going back and forth and back and forth. So I've really.
How do you get yourself into these situations?
I've soured
That's
the
crazy.
entire idea of the wedding dress for me.
It will be easier to smuggle narcotics across
genuinely,
the planet.
but genuinely. Oh my
Hakeem
God.
knows as his doctor. He's got a guy for his surplus meds.
Absolutely. Dude, I remember when I was in med school, I was randomly in one of the surgical wards, and they had the medical cabinet, and normally they're under lock and key, and there's some codes or whatever the fuck. But I remember there's just a cabinet. And I remember I was like, I'm just interested. What do they got? And then I open it up, and they have all the good shit. They had all the hard opioids. They had all the benzos. They had everything just lined up beautifully in unopened packages. I'm like, no, nobody's even tried to. Would they notice? Even?
It's like encouraging you. Maybe that was the tactic.
This is entrapment, is what I'm saying. It was entrapment.
Yeah.
CIA.
Exactly right. I didn't take any, or at least I didn't get caught. As far as
these are the mystery pills you gave us when we were traveling together. You're like, oh, do you feel bad? Like, how? What? In what way? Do you just feel bad in general? This will fix it.
This is I want to have a good day.
Yeah.
Take this yellow pill. No question.
If you don't feel bad, take this. That'll fix that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I would love to be the border cop that like opens a very large box. Probably, what does it come in? Probably a box.
Yeah,
and then there's a wedding dress inside of it. Like I would run that through an X-ray scanner 1,000,000,000 fucking percent.
Yeah.
Why the fuck is a wedding dress traveling cross border? And even if there's a tracker to find the fact that it's being sent back, but because they're evading taxes, they probably didn't even register it as the product that's being sent.
You are 1,000% correct. Yes, you are 1,000%.
So what was it?
correct.
Materials, cloth.
It was cloth samples. I believe is what they wrote.
You missed your calling. You should have been a smuggler.
I was gonna say I feel like with a white dress there are a couple of white products that could very easily have been hidden in that dress.
Yeah, exactly right.
10 out of 10.
By the way, the dress weighs several kilos because it's a huge dress. It's a wedding dress, right? And it has all the stuff in it to keep its structure.
A man explaining a wedding dress. It has many stuffs in it.
Yeah, exactly right. But
put on and walk around in it. Yes.
It's over 4 kilos, and they're just looking at it's like, sheets of cloth samples, 4 kilos in an oversized, strangely like dress-shaped box. I love it.
Well, hopefully the rest of your process goes a little bit more smoothly.
No, he's like, I am ordering chairs. He's like, well, I'm ordering chairs from Spain. I'm ordering table from America. All the beer is going to come from Brazil. Like, it's just... Okay.
Oh my God. I'm very excited. We're very excited. We have a backup dress.
And
doesn't, yeah.
And does your bride know that you are Lenin too?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. She listens to this. She listens to this. She loves the show.
The reincarnation of Ilyich.
Exactly right. I wish.
But only the head, without the body.
Not even the eyes, just the head.
Just scary at the eyebrows.
Really disconcerting in person.
Exactly right. Hey, it saves us on the suit. I don't know what to tell you. The portrait is wearing a suit.
Jokes aside, he's like extremely elegant, just like Lenin was. And when I met him the first time, he's basically like a darker skinned Lenin with a full set of hair. Like I'm not even joking. And he could probably pull off he's clean shaven, but he could very much so pull off.
So you're basically Lenin sneaking back into Petrograd in the middle of October.
Exactly right.
Just like clean shaven,
with the
full
fluffy
head of
hair.
hair.
Exactly right. Yeah. Oh my God.
That's pretty awesome.
Now when I'm looking at it, okay, so I'm a bit thicker than Lenin. I don't know which part of him I would be, but JT is literally.
Places, I'm sure.
And the most important one, I doubt it. I'm pretty sure somebody that can pull such historic feats is very thick down there, if you know what I mean. But I'm sorry, apologies.
I went there. That's my bad.
No, God bless. But JT basically has Lenin's facial hair. I don't know.
Lenin would be unstoppable if he had JT's curls. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Christ! If Lenin was hit with the
with the Dominican ray. Well, howdy, y'all. Today we've got a very special guest episode for you. And with us today we have Daniel from the podcast, The Sickle and the Hammer. You're not getting his last name. We're not doxing another guest. It's a beautiful, thorough crash course on the history of the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union. We are very excited to have Daniel here. We were chatting before the show that we have wanted to do an episode on the Russian Revolution for quite a while. And we thought this would be the perfect way to do it, because if you haven't heard Daniel's podcast, it is very, very good, and he'll tell us all about it. But this is a topic that a lot of people, particularly in the West, could use a bit of brushing up on, myself included. So I'm mostly gonna leave it to our experts here, Hakeem and Daniel, and I'll just sit here and look purty. But Daniel, thank you for coming on. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Daniel. My podcast is The Sickle and the Hammer, a socialist history of the Soviet Union. It is available on all major podcasting platforms. And I like to say that I'm really just a guy. Like I have a bit of a formal educational background in Russian area studies. And I've been kind of living and breathing Russia in various capacities for the last 20, 25 years. but I don't have like a PhD. I didn't dig through declassified archives or anything like that. I just have read a lot of Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin and the people who do a good job of actually summarizing the real story of the Russian Revolution after that. I've spoken to Russians about it, and I just think it's, like JT said, a really important history. It was the first successful overthrow of the bourgeoisie and the landowning aristocracy in world history. And, you know, my show right now is going through the Russian Revolution. I am ultimately going to go through the entire 75-year history of the Soviet Union.
Nice.
Probably do a little coda with like Yeltsin up to the ascendancy of Putin.
I am so fucking excited. Oh my God, that's so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be honest, I'm scared because I've had this idea for like many, many, many years. And then slowly over the years, I started realizing, oh, there actually are resources that would allow me to do this, at least a decent job of it. You know, because when I was getting my formal education, it was all about like Robert Conquest and all these other anti-communist Cold Warrior professors and everything. You know, just this very like, yeah, communism really sucks and is anti-democratic, isn't it? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But even now, it's like there is so much to go over. Sometimes I love Lenin and I love the way he writes, but sometimes I'm like, dude, you can take a break. I don't need to be reading like all of this all the time. There's so much.
Yeah. Well, you've done an amazing job so far. You've done a really thorough bit of coverage thus far. You're 18 episodes in now?
Not quite. I think I just put out episode 12 and I'm working on 13. I think 14 or 15 is going to be actually October.
That's right.
Which should be coming out soon. And then after that, it's the Civil War and then the early Soviet government and, you know, stuff from there.
There's even some nice little theory crash courses in there for our little piggies who are not yet exposed to the labor theory of value. So that would be a good place to start for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But so the first episode of your podcast, it gives the listener a glimpse into your interesting background. So maybe you could share some of that with our audience. You've spent a lot of time in Russia, right?
Yes. All told, I lived about 4 years in Russia. 1 year when I was studying abroad way back in university, which was redacted a number of years ago now. And then I moved there because I graduated in 2008, which was the best year ever to be entering the job market, especially in the United States.
Yep.
And ultimately, I wound up teaching English, which was a lot of fun. I got paid really well to do it. My wife and I lived in an apartment in Moscow. Her family wasn't too far away. It was a lot of fun. And I just realized like, oh, so I'd always had this like kind of weird fascination with Russia, just something about the accent and man, it's always cold and dark over there. Like, you know, I'm from the north of the United States, like the Northwest or the Midwest, but the northern portion of the Midwest. So I was just like, what if it was like what I experienced, but 3 times longer every year? It's just the darkness and the cold. And when I was living in Russia, I was like, oh, I should actually try it. I'll bet it's easier for me to find what Russians have to say about their own history here than it is in the United States. So I just started like reading stuff. I started reading a little bit of Lenin, started reading a little bit of Trotsky, which I know is maybe giving some people, you know,
people are picking up the pickaxe.
But don't worry, I'm not I'm not a Trotskyist. It's just like, I don't know, he was some of the stuff that I've read. I've also obviously read some Stalin, just started reading some history. And then when I came back from Russia and I got into my graduate program, it was more of the same because starting in high school, I like to tell this story. So I had it was my junior year of high school, and I had a 20th century history teacher, and he did do a portion on the Russian Revolution, but it was the very general, generic, like, yeah, the Bolsheviks just wound up killing everyone, and so it was a bad idea. And the lesson is, don't ever try to do a revolution.
Very bad.
And I remember when they were doing the background, or when the teacher was doing the background to it, I don't remember what it was, but I'm positive that he very shoddily summarized like Marxist economic or political economic theory. And then he hit the button and the next slide came up and it was just, was Marx right? And then he hit another button and from the left side of the screen came in the word no. And then he hit another button and it moved on. Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, what?
King shit. I love that.
Dominating the
misargument.
marketplace of ideas with a slide.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know, just as I grew up, I went through the 2008, 2009 crash. That was at a really formative year of my life. I remember where I was on 9/11. And it's just like I'm a millennial. My generation has just like seen nothing but the failures of capitalism and it's getting worse and worse every year. So then I became a socialist based off of that. And then when I started reading the Russians, I became a communist. And my whole goal of my show is just to bring this information both to the American left, and the English speaking left, but just the American public in general. Like I'm really trying to strike a balance in my show between heavy theory that is important and you need to understand for the context of why the Soviets are doing what they're doing. But on the other hand, like it's history. And even if you don't identify as a socialist or a communist, I want you to be able to have access to this history from a direction that leads you to a conclusion other than just no. Like I want to explain exactly what's happening, like where these ideas are coming from, how they're, well, and that's just the thing. It's just like the truth is, you guys talk about this all the time in America. You can't trust what they tell you. Yeah. And I know that sounds conspiratorial, but you just can't. You look into it and you're like, oh, they're not telling me this. They lied about that. They twisted these dates to make it look like the communists were the ones that started the fight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to know the truth about what happened and the good and the bad of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
You might say we need to get deprogrammed.
Oh, God.
Exactly.
I'm going to bleep you for that. No deprogram jokes. Well, no, I know we were all very excited when you reached out to us to tell us about your show, and I'm glad you did, because this is something that has been sorely missed, I think, on the left. Just an outlet where it is, here are the facts. It is presented to you in a way that you can understand, in a way that is not, not super bombastic. It's not, it's ideological, everything is, but in a way that a layperson, like you said, could pick it up and just say, like, oh, this is interesting to me. I'm going to learn about this. I don't feel like this guy is trying to sell me something. And that is really cool and it's very refreshing. So before we dive into the meat of the episode, everybody go and sign up for Daniel's Patreon. He does have a Patreon. Please support the show so we can put out more excellent content like he has so far.
I will say just real quick, the Patreon is the only way I'm making any money off of this. I do have a full-time job, so the episodes are coming out a little sporadically. I had a backlog of episodes that I'd worked on that I have now worked my way through. I am a father, and I have to sell my labor to, provide for myself and my family. Yep. So this is a spare time kind of gig, but it is a giant labor of love. Even if it takes 10 years to get through it, I'm going to get through it. But if you want to support monetarily, that would give me the opportunity to maybe step back from other stuff that I have to do to like turn this into a part-time gig or something. The Patreon's the only way that I'm funding this. And I will be coming out with a whole other thing of tiers, and I have all these ideas for what I actually want to eventually turn the Patreon into. And I think I'm getting to the point where it makes sense to do that now. So yeah, please, if you support me on Patreon, that would be greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's how it works on the left. And thankfully, there is a huge community of people willing to support principled content like the Deprogram, like all of our individual channels, like your work. And I'm sure that a lot of people will flock to your Patreon once they've listened to your episodes, because they are excellent. So links will be in the description, dear piggies, dear beautiful listeners. And for each sign up, I will stroke your ears for 5 minutes. Ooh, all right. So without further ado, Hakeem, use that big old brain ears to ask our guests some questions.
Absolutely. I was thinking, just to keep the interest high, the entire progress or history of the Russian Revolution is intensely fascinating. But like most things with Soviet history, there's so much that happens, and it's not as boring as the I don't know if you want to call it the Machiavellian tendencies of like fascist Italy or something, where it's just a bunch of different sections of the Italian ruling class and aristocracy supporting different bits of the fascist goons against each other just to maintain their power. In the Soviet Union, it was ideological trends pushed forth by different groups within society, different class interests, even within the proletariat, depending on if it was those who were recently proletarianized versus those who were rural, so on and so forth. It's incredibly dense and diverse. So let's keep it interesting first with the question on the most controversial bits of history of the Russian Revolution, either pre or during the Russian Revolution. What do you think, if you could name the most controversial, at least in your mind, events or questions?
I guess it depends on who you're asking, because if you ask the Mensheviks and the SRs, they're going to say the October Revolution was the biggest controversy. But if you ask Lenin and the Bolsheviks, they're going to say the July days and the behavior of the Mensheviks and the SRs after that.
Yeah. Maybe we can touch on that, actually, because that's something that's frequently misunderstood.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, there were multiple parties that nominally called themselves socialist during the Russian Revolutionary period. And these parties all started round about the end of the 19th, start of the 20th century. Through my own research, I've kind of come to realize that the Mensheviks and the SRs, I like to call them socialist in name, because I can't think of a single time when it mattered and the chips were down, they stood up for the workers and the peasants. Yeah. This was at a time in European and world history when socialism was becoming very popular. And so to really get a lot of traction, particularly in Russia at this time, you needed to have some sort of association with socialism. I do not mean at all to say that the Mensheviks and the SRs were fascists, but it's like the Nazis, the National Socialists. They had to call themselves socialists just to get anyone to even pay attention to them.
Yeah.
But if you look at their behavior, like I said, they are constantly siding with the bourgeoisie, the aristocracy, the landowners, and there are other parties too. There's the cadets who do not at all pretend to be socialists and quickly become one of the most despised parties in Russia during 1917 because of it. The Bolsheviks are actually a party made up of, at first, workers, and then the soldiers joined them, and then a critical mass of the peasantry. They really are a popular party. And I think that helps to dispel one of the more common myths in America and kind of in the Western historiography of the Russian Revolution, that the Bolsheviks were just, it was Lenin and Stalin and Zinoviev and Trotsky and Kamenev, and there was just this cabal of people who conspired to overthrow a legitimate government, and they manipulated the masses. And that is absolutely not what happened. They were rooted in the proletariat class of Russia, which was very small, but had a very outsized influence on the economy at that time, particularly as World War I gets going. And it was their ability to harness and organize the working masses and then win over the soldiers and, like I said, a critical mass of the peasantry that allowed them to have a successful revolution in October that actually succeeded in overthrowing the bourgeoisie and the landowning aristocracy.
A point that was controversial even in its day, but sometimes you see, at least funnily enough, I've seen liberals kind of try to rehabilitate this, the Kornilov affair. And they tried to make it as seen as like, oh, well, this was an attempt to restore democracy and to restore the provisional government to power. This is, of course, clear historical revisionism, but there's even big names within the historical sphere, or like the modern Cold Warrior types, particularly of Yale Publishing, that continue this mythology. Can you just walk people through a little bit of what that was and who possibly could have supported such an insidious action?
Yeah. So the Kornilov affair happens at the end of August 1917, but the obligatory disclaimer that probably should have given at the beginning, At this time, Russia was on the Julian calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. So this is all happening 13 days prior to what we would say was on the calendar today. So in Russia, it's the last days of August, but today the dates would be given as like September 10th or something like that. But anyway, so what happens is after the July days, the government wants to get rid of the Bolsheviks. They try to blame the Bolsheviks for this failed overthrow of the provisional government. The Bolsheviks are the only party who are loudly demanding an end to the war. The Mensheviks are supporting the war. The SRs are supporting the war. Obviously, the provisional government's supporting the war. And in order to try to get the war to end, a small group of workers and soldiers in Petrograd, the capital at the time, modern-day St. Petersburg, then it was called Petrograd, try to overthrow the provisional government. Now, the Bolsheviks don't actually have anything to do with that. They did not instigate that uprising. And in fact, Lenin and several other members of the party tried to stop that uprising from happening. They begged the workers and soldiers not to do this because they knew it would be a mistake. They would not be able to hold on to power. The army would be sent in and they would all be crushed, and that would be the end of the revolution. There was still a small portion. There was some street fighting. There was a small portion of the proletariat and the soldier garrison in Petrograd at the time that did engage in that street fighting, but the provisional government survived, and they pinned everything on the Bolsheviks. Now, they tried to suppress the Bolsheviks after that through the first half of July, but for various reasons we can go into if you want to, they were not successful in doing that. And by the end of July, and particularly by mid-August, it was clear to everyone that somehow the Bolsheviks were actually in a better position than they had been just before the July days, despite all of the propaganda about how the Bolsheviks were trying to overthrow democracy, et cetera, et cetera. Kerensky is the prime minister of the provisional government. And he teams up with the commander-in-chief of the army, a guy named General Lavr Kornilov, or Kornilov, we would say anglicized. And they have a love-hate relationship. They both are trying to assert dominance over the other, but through kind of a series of
convenience.
Yeah, exactly.
And hatred of the Bolsheviks, essentially. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so Kerensky hatches a plot to bring in Kornilov and his troops to crush the Bolsheviks and the workers' movement. So to the extent that the Bolsheviks were anti-democratic, well, you have to ask, well, it depends how you define democracy. If you define democracy as official governmental organs, yeah, they were anti-democratic because they were against the provisional government because the provisional government sucked. They were ignoring the will of the people. They were actively plotting to crush the workers' movement. But if you define democracy as what do the masses of the people want, the Bolsheviks were not only the most, they were arguably the only democratic party in Russia at that time because they were so closely attuned to what the workers wanted. And they were making those demands and they were trying to actualize the plans to help the proletariat, to end the war, to give the land to the peasants, you know, the slogan, bread, peace, and land. They were the ones who were actually trying to do that. The marriage of convenience between Kerensky and Kornilov breaks down almost overnight. If you want the detailed blow-by-blow, go listen to my episode on it. I think it's actually pretty funny because Kerensky's kind of an idiot. he brings it down on himself. It's pretty funny. The Kornilov troops start moving on Petrograd, and for my money, the way the Bolsheviks and the people of Russia responded to the Kornilov affair is second only to October in the most inspirational moment of the entire Russian Revolution, because once the Bolsheviks have a debate and they realize, okay, we actually do need to stop Kornilov, even if it means saving Kerensky, we don't really have a choice here. We have to stop Kornilov. Once the Bolsheviks throw their lot in, the entire city of Petrograd erupts into activity. Workers are securing food stores. The railway workers are tearing up the railroads to make sure the troops can't take the train into Petrograd. Soldiers are training workers on how to use weapons. Detachments of workers and soldiers go out and start to weed out the Kornilovite conspirators who were trying to instigate disorder in the capital as a precursor to Kornilov coming in and, quote, restoring order. Really, the entire Kornilov affair falls apart because the workers and soldiers of Petrograd go outside the city and they meet the soldiers as they are approaching the city. So the railways have all been torn up, so they have to get out of the trains. And while they're getting out of the trains, the workers and soldiers basically surround them, point their weapons at them, say, hey, we don't want to do this. Let's just talk. And they explain, we're not the bad guys. Your generals are trying to crush the revolution. They want to come after the workers. They want to continue the war. None of the soldiers from the front want the war to continue. Everyone wants the participation in World War I to end. And when the soldiers who have been moved into the capital hear this, they're like, oh shit, well, we're not going to fight for the bad guys. And they immediately defect. They switch sides and they just join the workers and the soldiers movement from Petrograd. And like, that's it. The entire affair fizzles out. There's nothing else the generals can do because it demonstrates at the end of the day that the generals and the bourgeoisie and the landowning aristocracy and all of these people who we're told are always the big wigs and they're the ones who get to control things and they're the ones who have all the power. At the end of the day, they're just people. If the masses decide to disobey them, there's really nothing these people can do about it. And there's nothing the generals can do. And they get arrested and put in prison, and it energizes the workers' movement. And then that's when you start to get almost a straight shot from Kornilov to October in terms of mobilization of the masses.
Absolutely beautiful overview. Thank you for that. It's such an interesting episode of history, just in general. And what's interesting is that this same, I guess, mess up from the reactionary forces seems to repeat itself over and over and again in just increasingly funny ways. It's actually one of the most fun parts of learning about the Russian Revolution, just all these strange characters that pop up, and they're either from their quasi-pagan, like proto-fascist ideas of them being the like supreme leader of whatever the fuck is happening in Russia, to the old-style aristocrats who are like, well, you know what? This just proves that absolute power of the monarchy is the way it works. We had total stability back then. Forget the fact that we lost the war to Japan, and forget the fact that we're losing 1.5 million people on the what for Russia was the Western Front, but the Eastern Front, World War I, so on and so forth. Let's move on to another general topic before we narrow it down a little bit. We discussed a bit of a few controversial episodes, particularly ones that would be considered quote-unquote controversial in liberal academia, if that could be even considered to be academia. But there's a few common misconceptions. I mean, if you're to go over layman misconceptions, you're going to be here all day, because for such a significant episode of human history, it's so understudied, relatively. I remember I was...
I wonder why.
Yeah, exactly right. Something I always found funny is that when I was first trying to improve my English many years ago, I was much younger. I would try to read American or like English resources on history, and I would get these encyclopedias in English, and they would go through various things of chapters of different civilizations in history, and there would always be a chapter on the American Revolution. But the like Russian history entirely is like 14 pages or something, and the American Revolution is a good 50 pages that they talk about, right? Just the American Revolution, not nothing else, right? And I'm like, sorry,
I was just gonna say, which is crazy because as an American, it's like if once you start to learn about the American Revolution outside of the liberal bourgeois
the mythology,
the mythology about it, you quickly realize, oh, this was just about the most reactionary revolution there's ever been. Whereas the Russian Revolution, the whole thing takes place over 8 months, but it is so theory dense. I mean, entire volumes, an entire library could be created just out of all the material for the Russian Revolution. And all you get is the Tsar was overthrown. They tried to establish a government. Everything was going fine until the Bolsheviks screwed it all up for everyone, and then the Bolsheviks went on to murder everyone. So that's bad.
It's nonsense. All right, but the question I was that I want to get to is, what do you think are outside of like layman misconceptions? middle of the road, like you kind of know a little about the Russian Revolution. What is the most common misconception in your perspective?
I think we've kind of alluded to it already, which is that even if you know that the Bolsheviks were what later became the Communist Party, and so they are the communists, even though they don't call themselves that until I think they make the switch in like 1918 or 1919. But anyway, even if you know that the Bolsheviks are the Socialist/Communist Party, our understanding in the U.S. is so devoid of the understanding of the theory, but then also the undeniable class nature of the revolution. That's one of the things that's always fascinated me about the Russian Revolution is you could not get a better, more textbook example of class antagonisms, the contradictions inherent in capitalism, everything exploding out into the open, and what can happen when specifically the working class, although obviously in Russia they had to join forces with the peasantry just because if you don't know, the workers were only about 10% of the population in Russia during World War I, and the peasants were like 85%. So you need some union with the peasants in order to actually build a revolutionary proletariat state. But anyway, it's a textbook example of what the proletarian class can achieve when they're united in their goals and they do not allow themselves to be distracted or co-opted by adventurism or opportunism or these promises of, well, you just have to follow the proper channels. You just have to wait for the Constituent Assembly. You just have to let the government work it all out. When the people say, no, we're hungry now, we're cold now, we're dying now, we're not going to wait. When you have the vanguard party that Lenin talks about and what is to be done, the Russian Revolution shows you like, yeah, this is absolutely possible. It's hard. It's not pretty all the time, but it's 100% possible. And that's why I think the Russian Revolution is simultaneously both inspiring and largely ignored, because we all know why they don't want us to know what is possible.
Beautifully put. Then let's kind of narrow it to something more specific.
Sure.
When it comes to, I guess, misconceptions. And is this one that we kind of very briefly touched on, but the misconception that there was once a constituent assembly, it was a democratic organ, and that supposedly the Bolsheviks did not win the elections and they were democratically unpopular. So by force of arms, they dissolved the Constituent Assembly and instead pushed forward their political will through the Soviets, specifically the Petrograd Soviet at the time. Walk us and the audience through that, because it's such a tightly wound, excuse the term, ball of bullshit that they that's condensed in this. But this is, for all intents and purposes, the most common understanding of this, including across liberal academia as well as in high school textbooks. This is how they present the case. I mean, in the West mostly. I mean, English language.
Yeah.
But also like pretty internationally. I've had like plenty of young, keyword there, young, born after the Soviet Union fell apart, Russian liberals use that particular argumentation. That one, or the whole, whenever they're more, nationalistic, the whole, which I'm going to ask a question about later, the whole, it was a betrayal because we lost everything that was gained during World War I, betrayal of all the soldiers that have died, etc., etc. But yeah, that particular point, Herder, they couldn't win, quote unquote, democratically through the official channels that Daniel beautifully explained why that was no longer either an option or no longer a legitimate pursuit. They lost, so they got pissed off, so they used violent means to take over. So yeah, it's an extremely common misconception, even in my part of the world, and I think even back in a lot of Soviet republics, even to an extent. Yeah,
I think the homogeneity of liberal ideology is really impressive because instead of having like socialism with national characteristics, you have liberalism with national characteristics, but they're all just saying the same thing over and over again. Also, Hakeem, I love the question. I love that topic because it's the perfect example in the Russian Revolution of the phenomenon we observe today of right-wing grifters just spewing the simplest notions of bullshit in like 3 minutes, and then it takes like an hour and a half to debunk everything, because it's like, I don't even know where to start telling you how wrong you are.
Yeah, exactly right.
So I will try. So the Constituent Assembly starts to become a buzz phrase shortly after the overthrow of the Tsar. The Tsar is overthrown at the end of February 1917. Again, these are old style dates. So if you look them up sometimes online, you'll see this is all happening in March by our calendar today. But that's why they call it the February Revolution. It was February in Russia at the time. So the Tsar is overthrown. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how do we form a new government? What do we do? There are a couple of complicating factors to finding an answer to this question. One, the country is still at war. Germany is still on Russia's Western Front. The Tsarist Duma kind of, through a complicated process, morphs into the provisional government. But then the workers also form spontaneously their own Soviets, not just in Petrograd and Moscow, but all over the country. So you wind up with this dual power in Russia for most of 1917, where you have the popular organs of the Soviets representing the workers and the peasants coexisting with the provisional government and more official channels. And the tension inherent in this dual power relationship is held at bay for a time by the promise of a constituent assembly. So the idea is, we're going to have a grand coming together of all the sections of Russian society as soon as we can to hash out a constitution, to figure out what the laws are, what kind of government are we going to have? Are we going to be a parliamentary? Are we going to be a Republican government? Whatever. The problem is, and the problem with the idea that the Constituent Assembly was a legitimate, quote unquote, democratic institution, is that the provisional government keeps pushing back the dates the date when there's going to be a Constituent Assembly. First they say April, then they say June, then they say August, then they say September, then they say November after the October Revolution. So they just keep pushing it back and back and back, and the demands keep building up, but the government is unwilling or unable to call this assembly. So what happens after the Kornilov affair is Lenin realizes, okay, this government is on its way out. It is defunct. It needs us to protect itself from its own military, which they demonstrated in the Kornilov affair. So we now need to orient ourselves, we the Bolshevik Party, need to orient ourselves and the workers towards taking direct control, because this Constituent Assembly isn't even going to solve anything. So they effect the October Revolution on October 25th, 1917. It's actually kind of like a week-long process, but the 25th is usually when they say the October Revolution happened. And they form a new government, which is the People's Commissar, or it's the Soviet of People's Commissars. So instead of ministers, they have commissars. And all of the famous names from the Bolshevik Party take up posts in this new government. And they reaffirm that, okay, there is in fact going to be an election for the Constituent Assembly on November 12th. We're still going to do that. But there are two problems. One, they just overthrew the provisional government. And in a country that has been racked by war, the economy has ground to a standstill because of it. You have political party like the Mensheviks and the SRs disavow the Soviet government. They want nothing to do with it. They start muddying the waters. The problem with holding the Constituent Assembly elections on November 12th is that A, there's been a revolution. The provisional government has been overthrown, and now there's a Soviet government. And B, and this is a little technical, the Party of the Peasants is the SR party, which stands for the Socialist Revolutionary Party. But throughout 1917, I don't know if we'll have time to get into this, but throughout 1917, there is a growing schism within the SR party. And you have the right SRs and the left SRs. The right SRs basically wind up being the petty bourgeois, small land owning portion of the countryside. and the left SRs are more the poor and working peasants. But for the election on the 12th, they're using party rolls from September and October, but this is before the left SR and the right SR parties formally split from each other. So in the countryside, when you're voting for the SRs, even if you want left SRs, there are no left SRs. No one is denoted as left or right on the party rolls. So you just see SR party. I'm just going to vote for the SR party. Because of this, the SRs wind up being overly represented in the Constituent Assembly. So the election happens on the 12th. The Bolsheviks win, I think it's like 35 or 40% of the overall vote across the country, which is pretty impressive since the working class, again, is only about 10% of the population. But the SRs do have the majority. They decide to call the first session, what turns out to be the only session of the Constituent Assembly in early January in Petrograd. But what the Soviet government quickly realizes is that the Constituent Assembly is actually going to be very combative towards the Soviet government. So then they have a choice. Do we give in and try to compromise with a Constituent Assembly that is very obviously combative towards us and wants to undo everything that the revolution has already won? Or do we just kind of ignore them? And they do give the Constituent Assembly, the delegates there, they do give them opportunities to like compromise. They give them a couple of conditions. They say, hey, we'll work with you on this and that, but you got to give us this. And the SRs, the right SRs that are in the Constituent Assembly, reject all of these terms. And at that point, the Bolsheviks and the left SRs realize, okay, well, this is a non-starter. This isn't going to go anywhere. So they just leave the Constituent Assembly, which leaves only the right SRs there. And what's funny is the report of what happened at this session, it only lasted about 13 hours long. Basically, after the Bolsheviks and the left SRs leave, they give orders to the guards not to violently disperse or arrest or harass any members of the Constituent Assembly. They say, just let them talk. No one's listening. What's it going to hurt? Just let them wear themselves out. And eventually they do, and they go home, and then they lock up the Constituent Assembly, like they lock the hall and they're not allowed back in. And that's kind of the end of the Constituent Assembly. Now, if you hear that story, you might think, oh, well, see, the Bolsheviks did ignore the democratic will of the people. But that's ignoring that the Constituent Assembly, as Lenin argued, was more of a liberal bourgeois institution in the revolution, and that the Soviet government represented the revolutionary proletarian institutions of the revolution. Therefore, the Soviet government is actually already a step ahead of the Constituent Assembly in terms of democratic potential. So what Lenin argues is that the Constituent Assembly represents a step backwards for the revolution. It is a liberal bourgeois democracy, which, if you've read Marx and Lenin, and I'm sure others as well, you know is a very limited type of democracy. They already have a revolutionary proletariat democracy in the Soviets. So why would we submit ourselves to the will of the Constituent Assembly? The Constituent Assembly should submit themselves to us. We are the majority. We are the people. We are the nation. They should listen to us. And when the Constituent Assembly refuses to do that, they say, okay, well, then fine. You're not going to be a thing anymore. And they let everyone go home. They don't let them assemble again. And I think the greatest proof that Lenin is correct in his assessment is that there was not a single outcry except from the petty bourgeois and landowners about the Constituent Assembly being disbanded. The workers, the peasants, the soldiers, nobody cared. It was only the people who realized that if we don't have the Constituent Assembly, we don't actually have any access to political power anymore. They were the ones who were angry, but they were the ones who also refused to work with the new revolutionary government. So you made your bed, now you got to lie in it.
I love it. I love it. Beautiful, beautiful overview of a very complicated episode of history. Not because it's necessarily difficult to understand, but just because you have to give so much background information. And that's why it's so easy to just be like, oh no, well, there was this democratic organ and the Bolsheviks shut it down, so that means that they were undemocratic, which, funnily enough, by the way, in the vast majority of quote-unquote democratic and free elections in the United States, particularly small-town elections, there's one person on the ballot. Otherwise, if there are two people on the ballot, it's from the one capitalist party or the other capitalist party, both wildly unpopular, reaching all the way to the presidency, where the political system is so illegitimate and so unpopular that nearly half, and sometimes even more than half, of the American population chooses not to even vote.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Every election, if it didn't vote, was on the ballot, didn't vote, would win. Like no confidence would win every time.
Exactly right. It's the same
I mean,
thing
it
here.
does win. We typically get only like what? I think in 2020, the presidential election, everyone was in awe at the voter turnout, and it was like 70%.
Yeah.
And it was only
even less
that
than
because
that.
everyone was stuck at home and had mail-in ballots. Like, if everything had been going along as normal, I doubt you would have gotten 50% of the people to come out and vote, because like who cares? Both of these guys suck.
Yeah, exactly right. 66% it was in
2020?
1970. 66%
We did it.
in 2020.
2/3.
Like an
USA.
absolute joke.
USA.
It's even worse now. Like in Iraq, it's like 32%, 30%.
Wow.
And even those numbers are jacked up and false. Surely.
To give like a slight context or whatever, just for people to be able to imagine what the difference is between you establishing a new system and saying this is the way things are going to be run now by the will of the people, and then somebody trying to interject themselves in the new system that you've managed to develop and try to pull things back. I'll give the most American context ever, for example. Imagine, the American Revolution passes. And now they're setting up Congress. They're setting up, the whole American system of governance of an independent United States, of all of the colonies. But 20 million British royalists there with a lot more money than almost everybody around them in that particular part of the United States. So they utilize their political power in order to buy up a lot of patriotic, non-British Americans, unify with them, etc., in a broader, for example, I don't know, Farmers Party, etc. A lot of people that start going to the ballots that want to vote for the proper American Farmers Party don't know just how interconnected they are with the British holdouts. They get into the parliament with a very strong number, and now, for some reason, after having won their revolution, obviously these are two different revolutions, but I'm trying to get contextualize. So now, after the Americans have won their independence from Britain, all of a sudden you have a bunch of hardcore loyalists to Britain that are going to literally get instructions from London on how the United States is supposed to be governed inside of Congress. What the fuck do you think the American revolutionaries are going to do? No, fuck you. The fuck, we don't have to do this. Fuck off, because you want to take us back
on the one thing that unites them. Enslaving.
Okay, but let me give my allegory, like, so that it's understandable, right? So people could argue, oh my God, but that's undemocratic because there's still those 20 million holdouts, and they deserve their place in the fucking thing. But that's not how system building works. That is not how a fight for an alternative to what came before is solidified. That is not how a revolution is defended. Nothing would change ever throughout the history of humankind if you allowed the guys that used to fucking step on your neck for like 1,000 fucking years to then just waltz, literally like the fucking Spanish
Waltz,
dance. What
yeah.
was it? Waltz, thank you. No, that's an Austrian. That's fuck. Is it Spanish?
No, it is to waltz.
Yeah.
To waltz. Apologies to all waltz lovers. Waltz back into power. No, why would I do this? Right? And the Soviets even gave them, as much. The Bolsheviks gave them as much leeway as one would when they know that they hold the will of the people. But they rejected. Okay, you reject. We lock the doors. Eat my ass.
Yeah. In the Soviet government, by the way, RSFSR that then became the Soviet Union, it took one generation for former capitalists and aristocrats and white officers and all these people to get the right to vote again. It took people of African heritage in the United States 400 years to be given the right to vote, and even then they're systematically excluded at every point, regardless of the point of revolution, right? After a revolution, there's some people who are systematically excluded from elections, for example. Oh, this may be undemocratic in a person who is, I dare say, stupid for their fetishization of liberal democracy. Think about it like this. After Nazi Germany fell, right, denazification needs to happen. A lot of these former Nazis should not be given the right to vote in quote-unquote free and fair elections, as much as such a thing could exist, which is arguable. But that's not what happened in West Germany. No, they didn't even bar them the right to vote. They just grandfathered them into positions of political power, from the military to local mayoral offices, all the way to the top of the government.
They just joined different parties, but were allowed to re-enter the government in whatever way they wanted to.
Just a fresh coat of paint.
Yeah, all the talk about power and everything reminds me of both Mao's aphorism, "It's a revolution, not a dinner party."
Exactly
stupid.
Right.
You're not. This isn't going to be pretty. We're not going to be nice about it. And then also, obviously, Engels's On Authority essay, which he lays out, look, the bourgeoisie does this to us all the time. Even today in 2025, there is a communist party in the United States, and they are barred from running for elections. This is how political power works. And I think, at least in America and probably elsewhere, I think the way that the liberal ideology has been so effective is in convincing people that that's not how politics work. Politics are supposed to be civil. You're supposed to vote, and then if you lose the vote, you accept it and you organize for next time. And you're not supposed to go out on the streets. You're not supposed to actually exercise all means of your power or authority. You're supposed to be nice about it. But then as soon as the liberals start to lose ground, as soon as the socialists start to gain ground, they immediately turn to the right. They run to the fascists. Don't get me started on the joke that is the Democratic opposition right now in the United States to Trump. That's, I think the reason the Bolsheviks get so much shit is because they understood this and they did not shy away from exercising political power. The charge that the Bolsheviks were anti-democratic, I bet a lot of people don't know that actually the Bolsheviks at the Second Congress of Soviets that was taking place literally at the same time that the Bolsheviks military revolutionary organization was arresting the provisional government and declaring a Soviet government, the Mensheviks and the SRs were given the opportunity to stick around and join the government, and they voluntarily walked out of the government, leaving only the Bolsheviks and the left SRs. So what are the Bolsheviks and left SRs supposed to do? Are they supposed to say, oh, well, I guess this isn't proper, so fine, we'll give in to your petulant demands? Or do they say, fine, fuck you guys. If you don't want to do this, we'll do it ourselves, which is exactly what they did. But I guess that's anti-democratic.
Yeah. One final addendum to this, especially the American conception of political power. It's like, okay, even if a well-meaning, well-intentioned American is like, oh, yeah, but okay, so they keep us down, whatever. But if we do that, when we get power, then we're no better than them. It's like, no, that's Marvel brain right there. You are better than them. Like, what do they represent? Like 6 dudes in a trench coat that shovel opioids into your mouth and strip the wires from your schools and all these things that are horrible for everybody. And you represent everybody else, not those 6 people. Like, one of those is better for humanity. Like, it should not be hard to determine which that is. It's like this weird, I don't know, false equivalence that they come up with.
It's lack of class consciousness. Like, if you tell somebody in the 21st century in the West or the East, after the aristocrats were kicked out during the French Revolution, obviously this is much more complicated, would it have been absolutely chill to allow those that feasted while the people literally starved back into the newly formed government? They would say, fuck off. After slavery was abolished, do the fucking ex-slavers get to participate in in the society that the ex-slaves are trying to build up in this or that example. You have like 100 around the world. Of course not, because the idea of an aristocrat, of a monarchist, of a slaver, etc., have already been properly, let's say, class consciousness has been developed in the minds of pretty much 100% of the population on this particular people. Fuck those particular people, because our interests are not the same as that of a slave or that of an aristocrat. But when it comes to the petit bourgeois or the bourgeois in general, or a state apparatus that represents bourgeois interest, because of lack of class consciousness, we think we can talk with them, we can hold hands, we can, as Daniel beautifully put, even at our own detriment, choose to be, civil and polite about the way we form a new society with. No, fuck that. Develop your class consciousness to understand that the bourgeois are as bad, if not worse in certain cases, than the aristocrats or the slavers of the past. And that's when you will realize that you don't get to fucking talk with literal demons.
Yeah, to JD's point about, well, if we act like them, don't we become them? No, they are acting this way in order to exploit you, to keep you sick, to keep you in a very precarious material situation so that they can get rich off of your own labor. They are, and I know this word sounds very strong, but they are social parasites. They are sucking the life out of the rest of us. We are trying to feed ourselves. We're trying to house ourselves. We're trying to take care of our sick and elderly. We're trying to educate our children. We just want to live our lives. So it's like if someone's pointing a gun at you and they want to kill you, but then you have a gun and you point your gun at them, are you as bad at them because you're pointing a gun at them if they want to kill you and you want to stop them from killing you and other people?
Right.
I think most people would say, no, that's exactly what you should be doing. And funnily enough, it's the people who are constantly in America complaining about, they have the reactionary attitudes, who also have the guns, who like to think of themselves as the cowboys who are standing up to the dirty communist fascists, who don't understand, the whole, how the game is played.
I think there is one more thing that we should cover, aside from your absolutely brilliant overview of everything that you've given us today. And it's a shame we have you for such a short amount of time. We could be talking for hours. But here's a good thing, because everybody loves to dig a little deeper. And of course, your podcast is a fantastic resource. But book recommendations. What could you recommend for those who are interested in reading a bit more, also from the socialist perspective? I can probably assume some of the ones that you would recommend, but I want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, as you Americans say.
Yeah. I think that there's really no substitute for reading the primary sources. Honestly, Lenin. Like, I know we're all kind of simping over Lenin, particularly Akeem over here. But just really, like, I think one of the reasons why Lenin is such an effective revolutionary leader, and one of the reasons why so many people on the left respect him and admire him, frankly, is because his ability to apply dialectical analysis in real time to actually come up with a cogent and applicable and forceful political strategy that then gets put into practice and works is almost unparalleled in the history of socialism. Like, I will admit to not knowing so much about the Chinese Revolution, so I don't know if people would consider Mao or someone else there or elsewhere to be good at this, but I think Lenin is one of the best to have ever done it. So read what he had to say. Read State and Revolution. It's a banger cover to cover. I've read that book so many times. It is brilliant. And I have one of my precursor episodes is just like, what is Leninism? And I basically summarize the arguments of what is to be done in State and Revolution. So those are two good places to start. But then just read what he has to say about World War I, about the Second International and why that failed. Read what he has to say during 1917. He's mostly right about a lot of the stuff, and he's there living it. He's witnessing it. His analysis of what's going on is going to be far better than what you get from like Robert Conquest or whoever else you're going to read writing 80 years later that is specifically trying to make you think that Lenin is the devil incarnate. Other than that, one of the books that I've been relying on a lot is Alexander Rabinowicz's The Bolsheviks Come to Power. It kind of picks up right at the July days, so you don't get so much of the early revolutionary period, although it does have a prologue and he kind of summarizes it pretty effectively. But from July to October, if you want a blow-by-blow that is thorough and exhaustive, that book is really good. And it centers the democratic nature of the Bolshevik Party, all the debates that were happening, all the times Lenin lost the debate for a particular party line. You know, people might be surprised to hear that. Usually we think of Lenin as just the iron-fisted dictator who just imposes his will on everyone else. But no, he actually had to argue a lot, and he lost a lot of those arguments. And that's just how it kind of went. In the end, he was proven right, and that's why people kind of revere him now. But anyway, The Bolsheviks Come to Power, The Revolution of 1917 in Petrograd by Alexander Rabinowicz, I think is a fantastic, non-biased explanation of exactly how the Bolsheviks did it, where their strengths were, and how they shored up their weaknesses, and how they eventually won the day.
All right, we'd like to thank you, Daniel, again for coming on. This has been what I hope to be just part one of our exploration of the topic. We'd love to have you back on whenever you've got the time. This has been a blast. Certainly, I learned a lot. I know our beautiful little piggies, our listeners, have learned a lot as well. Once again, everybody, you can check out the Sickle and the Hammer wherever you get your podcasts. And links to Daniel's Patreon will be in the description. Please do check it out.
Click!
And give it a listen, or you got Nick will come for you. We'd like to thank our own patrons, without whom we couldn't do this. I listened to a podcast the other day that had ads in it, and I almost killed myself on the spot. So you consider yourselves very lucky that we do not take that, and we never will, and nor does Daniel. All right. Yeah. Daniel, anything else you'd like to say?
No, just, this history is really important. This is our history. We need to own this history. Whatever country you're from, whatever skin color you have, whatever language you speak, this is our history. And we are at a crucial moment in global history where global capitalism is teetering, and we have the decision between socialism or barbarism. And obviously we all think we need to choose socialism, but we need to know what the people who came before us did. We need to learn from their mistakes and from their successes. That's why I started my podcast. It's not just going to be a whitewashing, everything the Soviets did were perfect, rah, rah, too bad, fuck Gorbachev. Like I'm going to be parsing through the good and the bad and the ugly. But whatever it is, this is our history. We need to own it so that we can then apply it to today, and we can stop what's happening in LA. We can stop what's happening in Palestine. We can stop what is happening everywhere in the world that is subjugating people, spreading misery and privation, so that we can come together and actually build the better world that we all know we need.